Everybody, it's Debbie and Suellen back again to show you some tips about the Q24 long arm quilting machine and frame. And today, this time, we're going to talk about the leaders and how to load a quilt onto the frame. So the machine and the frame actually comes with the leaders that you see on the frame right now here. But we wanted to show you that Bernina came out with these zippered leader cloths after the fact. And so that's an additional accessory that you can purchase at any time. So you have the zippers here, and then it comes with some extra zippers to have several quilts that you can zip on and zip off your frame very easily. Today we're just going to be pinning, but we wanted to show you that so that you knew that they existed. All right?
Yep, and we're going to talk about how you can keep your quilt square as you get it loaded and you're quilting.
That's correct. That's awesome. Thank you.
I had the unfortunate experience a couple times in my frame at home of loading my quilt and having it go above this backing
dead bar. Yeah.
And so I store my the leader going up and around, because then when I pull it out, it's always under the bar. I also have a red mark right here on mine, and so that it's easy for me to
find the
center. But that's my personal one. And so as I'm loading it, there are a couple things that I wanted to show.
That you prefer to load from the front, correct?
I prefer to load from the front. Loading from the back is equally fine, and many people do it. I like to load from the front because then I can have the pins right here in front of me.
I load from the front as well.
Yeah. I also, if I have an option, will load using the bias along the edge, because I know that the bias is going to be absolutely straight.
Agreed.
If I can't do that for some reason, if I have to load a cut edge, sometimes I'll rip it, and so that I know that it is straight of grain along the grain, and so that I make sure that it's straight of grain. But you do want to make sure, if at all possible, to have yours on straight of grain. So you're going to load this upside down, and I have marked the center. And so the first thing I'm going to do is find the center here, match the centers.
So the center of the backing and the center of the leader cloth.
Correct. And so the center, I get the centers here. And this is important because I've also marked the center on the other side. So I want to make sure that when I am putting the other side on, that it will work. So now after I get a couple of them going like this, then I'm going to go get some pins. And although it's on my wish list to have a wrist pin cushion, a magnetic wrist cushion would be absolutely wonderful. But what I do is, because I'm loading in the front, I can put my pins right there, and I have my platform. And so then I can just keep the pins right here.
And they are almost touching her pins. I'm the same way. I like them very close.
So, and I've tried a lot of different pins. I've used the T-pins. I've used the yellow quilting pins. I've used lots of different pins. The T-pins for me were harder to push in, and so I'm not as big a fan of using the T-pins. Mine are still in the box now. I put them back in the box. The yellow ones that I use for quilting are longer, but they're not as sturdy, and so I have many bent pins. And so in what it's come down to is I really do like the corsage pins
Are you
better.
talking about these flower pins?
No,
No?
I haven't tried out flower pins. They seemed even.
They're a little bit thinner than
Just
these
the yellow, the yellow round-headed.
Oh, okay.
So then I'm going to start from the other side. So I start in the middle. Yeah, I've used those, and those are fine, but they are a little bit thinner than the corsage pins, and so they do bend. So then I'm going to go to the other side. So I start in the middle and go out. And we're doing a baby quilt today because for demonstration purposes, I didn't think you needed to watch me pin a very long edge all along the frame. So we're just doing.
We're loving watching you do this. So you do this so well.
So, and
almost done.
This is the back of a baby quilt.
And I love the color that you chose here. It's very, very
so,
pretty. Very great.
We'll be
we do
binding.
sell that here at LindaZ too.
Yeah.
Everyone, so.
And I have used this cuddle fabric for a lot of baby quilts. Babies really seem to love it. And if I have little pieces of cuddle, then I will serge them together to have a multicolored quilt back, because
Hey, there you go.
I just,
No
I don't
waste
want to
in your world.
waste.
I
No,
don't like waste either.
no. So there we have the back.
All right, take these pins.
Okay, so that's why I like doing from the front, because number one, I know it's going to be under this back bar. And number two, I have a platform to hold my pins, since I still have on the wish list to have my wrist cushion.
I'll remember that.
Yeah. So then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to roll this up so that I don't have quite as much just hanging out. And this way we get to see the pretty back. Still,
The dimples.
Yep.
Mhm.
And I try to keep it rolling on straight. And then I'm going to find this. I've marked the center on here already, and I marked the center on here as well. And so I'm going to come right here, and again I'm going to match the centers.
And how I remember this is that and it's kind of like the opposites. So the backing or the lower part of the quilt goes on the upper rail, and the topper goes on the lower rail. So it's like it's kind of weird how that works, but
Right.
the backing does need to be level with the back of the machine so
Right.
that it can stitch properly.
Okay, so then we're going to put some pins up here again.
Oops, there you go.
You can just drop them. And there I have my pin shelf. And many times what I'll do is I will look and see where the quilt back or the quilt top back ends, and make sure that I end at the same place, so that I'm ending up with the same amount of especially on a knit, of stretch as I'm putting it on. I try not to stretch, because part of the reason that some people get skip stitches is loading a quilt too tightly, and so I do try to make sure I don't put any extra pressure on. There we go, and now we'll go back the other way. So the next thing, after I have this on, I'm going to roll it back and forth just a little bit to make sure that it is all evened out. So I don't want to just go ahead and start putting on the top. I'm going to roll it this way up here, and then I'm going to roll it back, because this just lets the fabric relax a little bit, and so that I know that it's going to be, yeah. And make sure that we can keep the edges even. With knits like this, it takes just a little extra babysitting, but it's so worth it.
Yes.
Okay.
Turns out beautifully quilting on these, you guys.
Yeah,
Very
it does.
Yep.
It does. Okay, so now you can see it's rolling up nice and straight on here, and just kind of turning in a little bit here, but once we have the rest on, it will be fine. The next thing I would do is, we may need to stop for a second, is put on the batting. After you have the back on, then if you choose, sometimes with Minky you don't need to put a piece of batting in, but I like to. It's just kind of cuddly for little ones. So I'm going to put this piece of batting up right next to the pin blind. And after I have this up, I want to make sure that my quilt is lined up exactly with the machine and how it stitches. And so I'm going to run a basting stitch right along here. I'm going to line up the batting with the leader. I'm going to come over here, and you have a choice when you go into stitch regulator 3. You can have either 1 stitch per inch, 2 stitches per inch, or 4 stitches per inch.
In the baste.
In the basting. And I use the 2 stitches per inch when I'm doing most of this, but if I'm going to do a meander around a quilt, if I'm wanting just to baste it, baste the whole thing, I'm going to do 1 stitch per inch. But it's totally your choice. So we're going to do this. I'm going to do 2 stitches per inch. And I have this up out of the way. I don't really need it. And so, And when I'm doing this, you'll notice that I'm pushing down just a little bit here. This helps keep it flat, and so that I don't end up with puckers. And so I'm just, and you can do it from the back too if you want to do it from the back, but if you just put a little bit of pressure as you go along, then that keeps you from having puckers as you base things on in place. And I'm not pushing this forward or back. We have this here engaged, and so it's going straight. And so that I know that when I put this in, if I'm doing free motion, I don't have to worry about it as much. But if I'm going to do a pantograph, I want to make sure that the quilt is lined up straight
with a straight line.
With how it's going to stitch in the future. So now I have a line to line the top of my quilt up. And so I'm going to put the quilt here right along that basted line. And I'm going to match it up right here. And I'm going to make sure I have space on each side, an equal amount of space on each side. I'm going to get this all nice.
The batting would have been a little bit wider, as wide as the backing, in fact. But we just had a little scrap here, so.
And when I put the clamps on, I just clamp the backing. I don't clamp the batting. So then I can come back here. You can pin if you want, but since I know this is straight, again, I'm going to do this just to keep it nice and flat as I go along and do the basting. And I make sure it stays right on that line. Okay, and then what I do is I want to make sure that, and I do this all the way along in a quilt. I have this, and this is set up for I have a 14-foot at home, and so it's wrapped around a couple times at the end.
Because yours is a longer frame,
mine's
obviously.
a larger
This is a
frame.
12-foot, yeah.
And so I've sewn Velcro on the ends of this, but I'm going to then string this across. And because this is set up for a different size frame, I just wrapped it around. But now I have a marker right here. And so here is the center. But let's say I want to see where this border is. And I want to see where this border is. And let's bring in, do you want to bring those two in? I'll bring these two in. And so I can keep this. In fact, I know I have 3 squares here, so I could put this here. I can put this here. I can put this at the edge of the quilt. Let's see, 1, 2, 3 in. And now, as I am moving the quilt forward, I can make sure I keep these here. I can even put a little clip on there. As I advance the quilt, I can make sure that this border always stays here, because sometimes, and I don't remember, if you're left or right-handed, your quilt seems to drift in different directions, and so
as you're advancing,
winding
it forward.
And so this helps me keep my quilt straight. So with a little quilt like this, I would probably use these two.
So instead of pinning it to the leader underneath here,
Yeah.
which you could do also, pinning, marking
so-
the center of the top,
Right.
With the center of this leader, you could actually.
Yeah,
but-
absolutely. And
but
on
this
big
is
quilts, a
small,
lot of
yeah.
times I will do that, and so that you would pin it just the same way you pinned the others. But I really do like kind of floating the tops, and then each time I advance the quilt, I'm going to make sure that this top stays centered right with the centering tape.
And this is what Suellen's been talking about, is the long arm centering tape. So we do carry that here at LindaZ's. I mean, pink actually. So these are the Start Right quilt clips by Grace that are pink. They
Nice.
sell them in the 2 different colors,
Yep.
which are very nice.
Yep.
That is how to load a quilt on the frame and to keep it straight as you're advancing it. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.